This is Lindsay Vallandingham with the Symphony Group, and today I thought it might be fun, or at least entertaining, to share with you some real estate horror stories. Learn from those who came before you. Every single client that has a horror story would want you to know, because there are plenty of things that can go wrong. Who you work with matters, and we've got a lot of experience. I don't know if there's anything at this point that we haven't seen, that we haven't made it through to the other side. So I've got two different scenarios. Up first, I had a client. They called and said, "We have found the perfect home for us. It wasn't even on the market. In fact, it was a friend, neighbor who notified us that we can buy this home, and we put that home under contract." And they didn't use a realtor, and that's okay. That's every person's right. You don't have to use a realtor when you buy or sell a home. So they had their perfect new home under contract. They called me because they needed some help and some guidance in selling their old home. Perfectly normal situation. So we, as quickly as possible, got their home on the market and got their current home under contract. And everything was going along smoothly until it wasn't. You see, in electing to move forward with their purchase without their own representation, they started to hit some pretty serious stumbling blocks. The real estate contract had been drawn up between that home seller and this buyer by their friend who was a real estate agent, but wasn't representing the buyer's interests in that contract. The buyer agreed to things in writing that, looking back, they never would have agreed to. They agreed to circumstances that gave the sellers so much control over how this was going to move forward. And at one point, when the sellers of that home decided that maybe, in fact, it wasn't going to be a good idea for them to sell the home, suddenly my buyers found themselves in quite a predicament. Because you see, as I told you, we had their home under contract. And now they were hearing from the sellers of this dream home that they had found that all of a sudden they weren't going to be interested in selling, and that was going to leave my poor sweet family homeless. Unfortunately, those sellers had every right to do so because of the way that that contract had been put together. Having a buyer's agent represent you as a buyer, that buyer's agent is looking out for your best interest. We are there to make sure that this doesn't happen to you. While it might not seem like a terrible idea to have one agent sell your home and maybe work with the listing agent to go to buy, or to work without an agent, ultimately, this family regretted so much that they didn't have representation, that they had made agreements and commitments into that legal and binding contract that essentially took away a lot of their rights, or didn't provide them rights that they thought they would, could, or should have in that circumstance. I helped them in as much way as I possibly could without being their representative. I helped them learn to navigate what they could and couldn't do. And ultimately, they were able to work out a scenario that got them into the home at a much later date, honestly, than they had wanted to. They had to go ahead and sell their current home because it was already under contract with a buyer. And they had to move in with relatives for a few months until those sellers could agree and commit to move out of that home. So that is the learning point here for you, is that they were able to reach a happy ending, but looking back, the one thing that they wish in that transaction was that they had brought representation along with them from the get-go to make sure that they were taken care of, because ultimately they did have to give something up. They had to give up the opportunity to move from their old home into their new home, and they had to put everything in storage. They had to move twice, which is, that just sounds so stressful to me. The idea that you have to put everything into storage and then move it all back out. How many visits are you making to the storage facility because you forgot and packed this thing or that thing, or somebody needs their pink sweatshirt for school or whatever. I know that that was a frustrating time for them. And I know that in looking back, that's the one thing that they wish, is that they had elected to have a buyer representative draw up that contract, or at least review that contract on their behalf and make sure that they were well protected. So our second scenario is from a client who would absolutely tell each and every person today, don't do what I did. I had a wonderful family. Just like the other family, they were moving from one house into another house. So they hired me to sell their current home and to help them find their new home. They found a gorgeous home in a beautiful neighborhood and got that home under contract relatively easily and quickly, and then went about the process of getting their own home sold so that they could move from one to the other. Now, you may have heard this from your mortgage lender if you've ever bought a home before, but when you are in the process of obtaining a mortgage, they are going to look through all of your personal financial records. They are looking at your employment, at your credit, at your debt to income ratio, and they are using a complex equation, putting all this information together to qualify you for a mortgage. They are going to question anything that looks inconsistent. So if you have a very regular W-2 job and you get paid every other week and you get the same amount of money that is direct deposited into your bank account every week that looks consistent to the bank, they're looking for regular, predictable circumstances, predictable income, and they can say, oh, this makes sense. They question anything that is irregular. So when you talk with a lender, when you're getting pre-qualified to buy a home, they're going to tell you this laundry list of things. Make sure that you don't open up new credit. Make sure that you don't quit your job. Make sure that you, yada, yada, yada. Because again, they don't want some inconsistency. Well, I had those wonderful clients who heard that spiel and decided along the way to sell a family business. It seemed like the right time for them. They were making a big move in their life and they had this family business that they had run for a really long time. Ultimately, were not interested in pursuing further and decided to sell that family business. Unfortunately, it wasn't a large enough sale that they had a huge amount of income from it. It was something that was going to pay out income over time. Unfortunately, with that being your family business and your primary source of income, they found themselves suddenly one income short of being able to qualify for their mortgage. Their mortgage lender has to call them and say, what happened here? And they said, oh, well, we just sold our family business. The mortgage lender goes, well, that's very unfortunate. That was your source of income over the past several years, and now you don't have that anymore. And now we cannot qualify you for your loan. And again, they already had their brand new gorgeous house under contract, and they thought, oh no, what have we done? We didn't make enough money in the sale of this business to just be able to go and buy the house outright with cash. What do we do? And they looked to, in that moment, their genius lender, a lender that I will remember for forever because he was so brilliant. And they said, help us. We cannot lose this house. And he said, for your underwriter's sake, they're looking for consistency. You were running a family business in the restaurant industry, and therefore we need you to go find a new position in the restaurant industry where it makes the same money, you have the same income or as close as possible to that income, you can start earning quickly, and it's within the same field of work. So again, to the underwriter of this mortgage, that looks like consistency, and ultimately that's what they care about. If you went off and over that time period had gotten a teaching degree and you said, I'm going to sell my family restaurant because I'm going to go into teaching, that's great. Unfortunately, that looks inconsistent to a lender. It doesn't mean that your teaching job isn't as qualified for the mortgage as your restaurant job. The lender doesn't know that you are qualified enough in that new industry because you're green, you're brand new. And they know that, well, they've always been really good at this thing. So if they're willing to go back and do this thing that they seem to be good enough at to have been employed for the past few years, then we'll continue to underwrite. But if you make a left turn and you decide I'm going to go off and explore my passion, my career, this I've always wanted to do, it doesn't work for underwriters, unfortunately. You really have to be consistent more than anything else. And so this client had to immediately insert themselves back into the restaurant industry, trying to make almost exactly the same money as what they were making in their previous job. And they had to do so very, very quickly. Any underwriter is going to require multiple weeks worth of check stubs from your employer in order to underwrite a loan. And in this case, we had to have 30 days worth of new check stubs from this employer in order to obtain underwriting for a new mortgage. What that means is, as a real estate agent, I have to go back now and negotiate with those home sellers and say, look, this is what happened. We regret that this is the way that this went down, and we have already taken steps to remedy that. And would you, Mr. Seller, please be willing to wait an extra 30 days to keep your property off the market and keep it under contract just with us for 30 days while we obtain these new check stubs so that we can then close on this loan? And gratefully, that seller was willing to do that. And I think, again, it comes back to our experience in this market, in representing people as well as we can, in knowing how to negotiate and how to make this a win-win for buyers and for sellers, because at the end of the day, it has to be a win-win for both. We have to come back to the table and say, we really need your help. What can we do for you? And we work out a new scenario that gets everybody what they want. And ultimately, these clients, again, don't end up homeless. Learn from what we've learned in the past. Ask your mortgage lender or your real estate agent before you make a major change while you are in the process of looking for a new home, of selling a home, buying a home. It's a big deal, and those underwriters are very, very invested in the financials of your personal life during that time period, during what we call the escrow time period. They are very much watching what you do, and they will find out immediately. So before you make a major purchase, rack up a credit card, open up a new credit card, buy a car. Sometimes these things are unavoidable. Maybe your car dies and you just have to buy a new car. And we're not saying that you couldn't, but you need to be in consultation with your lender to see, what can I afford to buy? Maybe it ends up being a situation where you make a decision that is a short-term decision that gets you to the other side of that real estate closing before you make a permanent decision. Sometimes that's the way that these things have to work, because ultimately we know that your goal is to own this beautiful new home, and we don't want to see a mistaken judgment be the reason that you don't get there. If you are looking for representation, if you are looking for advice, if you're looking for counsel to help you through this process, to make this process as seamless as possible and to get you to your goal, make sure that you reach out to us at the Symphony Group. We want to help you find your perfect key. Email us at symphonyrealtygroup@gmail.com.